Hey, welcome back to lesson 4. In this particular lesson here, we're going to talk about the different type of looping controls that the C# language has to offer us. And let's see here. Alright, why loops? Loops are sometimes needed in programs to perform a certain task multiple times. For example, let's say we wanted to output the numbers 1 through 100 to the screen. Now we could write a write line statement 100 times, but that would be kind of inefficient and very time consuming. And the biggest problem with that is if you have to go back later on and you need to change something in that, you'd have to change that line 100 different times. So it's time consuming, inefficient, and just really not a good way to write an actual program to do something more than once. What we can do is we can accomplish the same task with a loop with very few lines of code. So let's take a look at the first type of loop we're going to talk about, and that'll be the do loop. Alright, so here is what a do loop looks like. You have the keyword do, then you have curly braces, opening and closing curly braces, then you have a while keyword, and then within parentheses there you have the condition. So how this actually works here is the code comes, the line gets executed, it's do, and then whatever's in the statement here, that gets executed, then it comes down to the while condition, and while the condition is true, the loop will keep going, it will keep going and on and on and on until that condition is false, or however you have your particular condition set up there. One special thing about this loop, or I guess I wouldn't say special, is this particular loop here will always execute at least once, and that's basically because the condition is after the statement of code that you have in there to be executed. So let's go ahead and create a new project here and put this loop into action. Let's go ahead and get into our Visual Studio, and we'll just start a brand new project here. And I'm going to call mine do loops. And I'll title the solution Learning C# do loop. And click OK there. So after it gets all created here, within this method here, first thing I'm going to do is get myself some space. Then I'm going to do the console.readline just so I don't forget about it, so we can see what's happening. Alright, then we'll do curly brace, while true, and okay. So there's our particular loop in itself. Now we can't just leave true here, because then we'd run into what's called an infinite loop. So we need some type of control index there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a Boolean. And you can do this with an integer as well. I can show you that example. We'll just call it keep going equals true. And we're still going to need some type of if statement here to say, hey, we need to change that this value here, the Boolean keep going, change that to false. So first, we'll just go ahead and put that here. And we said we're going to write out console.writeLine. And we're going to write out the numbers 1 through 100. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to need some type of stepping index so we know what number we're on. Well, let's just create an integer variable, and we'll just call that index, and we'll set that equal to 1. And we'll use that particular value to write to the screen. Int index.toString. That'll convert it to an actual string so the WriteLine will work properly. And then we need to increment the index by 1. So the next time it comes around it'll be 2. So to do that we'll just do int index equals int index, dang it, plus 1. Or you can do the shortcut method, which I prefer, int index plus plus. And that's the same thing as writing int index equals int index plus 1. So now we need our checking statement here. So we need to do an if int index is greater than or equal to 100. We need to change our BL and keep going to false. Okay, so let's take a look here to make sure this is going to work. Equal to 100. Actually, we're going to change this to 101. And let's see what we get here. So we have the numbers 1 through 100 output to the screen there. And the reason we did 101 there is because I had a greater than or equal to. If we did greater than or equal to 100, once it became equal to 100, it would stop. Now if we took off the equals and just put 100, we'd get the same results. Programmer preference, really, how you want to actually set that up there. So basically what we have here is we have our condition that we're checking right here, and that's in the while. And then we have this int index variable, which is it's our stepper. That's kind of the thing we're using to output to the screen, and also using that in an if statement to see if we need to keep going there using this particular this if statement right there. So a do loop, not terribly complex, and as we said before, this loop will always get executed at least once. So if we already set our index value here to 101, we know that's greater than what we need to be, but it will get executed at least one time, and that's just because the statement to be executed is before the actual while condition there. So I just wanted to demonstrate that to you. Alright, now you may or may not have picked up on the fact that we actually don't need the if statement in there and the actual Boolean value and whatnot there. What we can do here is we can actually eliminate even more code. If we take this out of there, get rid of our Boolean variable. It's all about reducing code, right? And then in here, if we do int index let's do less than 101. Let's see what we get when we do that. Oh, gotta change that back to 1 there. And let's try that. And we get the same results as before with fewer lines of code. And that's kind of what it's all about, is the accomplishing a task with as few lines of code as possible for easy readability, easy debugging when it comes down to it. So there's another way you can do the do loop, and again, you can do them however you want to. It's completely up to you. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So let's go on to the next loop we're going to talk about, and that one is going to be the while loop. The while loop is similar to the do loop, as they both have while in them, except that the while loop puts the condition first and the statement second. Here's an example of what the while loop actually looks like. So as before in the do, you still have the while and the condition that you're checking, and then below you have the actual statement. As you can probably guess by looking at this particular loop here, it will not always get executed. So let's go ahead and open up our code environment there, and let's put a while loop in action. Alright, once you got your new project created there, let's go ahead and put this while loop in there, and we're going to do something similar to before. We're just going to output the numbers 1 through 100 to the console itself. So I'm just give myself some space to do our normal console.read line, so it pauses the screen for us. And then we'll do our loop here. We'll do while. This is how you type it out. While, this is like we did before. True, opening curly, closing curly. Now again, we're going to need some type of index or some type of number, so we can use that to output to the screen, and we'll use that in our condition to see if it's true or false. So let's just go ahead and make a very simple variable again called int index, and set that equal to 1. And then in our condition here, we'll do the same thing as we did before. We'll do int index is less than 101. And then we're going to console.writeLine the int index to string. And then remember, we need to increment that. So do int index plus plus to so it keeps counting up for us. So what we have here, we have while int index is less than 101. Do these two lines of code here. One is going to be output to the screen. The next is going to be increment the actual variable by 1. So let's go ahead and run that and see what we get here. And as desired, we have 1 through 100 on the actual screen there. So you can see, these two style of loops here, they're not terribly difficult, and there's you can do them, like we did before. We did that, with the if statement in the actual while loop and having a Boolean variable in the condition. It doesn't necessarily have to be an integer. You could use anything in your condition that can be evaluated to true or false. And this is just one example here. And if you guys are still kind of unfamiliar about this index plus plus, we'll probably get into it a little more when we talk about like math operators and whatnot. But like I said before, it's just the same as saying int index is equal to int index plus 1. And what that's actually saying is it's saying, okay, if int index is equal to 5 right now, I want you to set that variable, the int index, equal to what its current value is plus 1. So if it is 5, I want you to set it equal to 5 plus 1, which will be 6. And then it'll come back around and check the condition again. Like I said, I like using the plus plus. It's just a little simpler and easier to read. And as before too, the loop functions kind of the same way. It'll do its check first, and if that evaluates to true, it'll do these and do these 2 lines of code, and then it'll loop back around, come up to the while. It'll keep doing this in a circular fashion until it evaluates to false, and then it'll jump out of the actual loop itself. So hopefully that makes sense there. Let's go on to the next loop we're going to talk about. And that one's going to be the for loop. Alright, the for loop, we're going to talk about this one now. This particular loop here could be considered one of the most powerful of the iteration loops. This loop is somewhat special, and it has 3 different options in how you can set it up. The way I will show you is the standard method, I think, but I'll also show you other ways as well. And you can make the choice on what style you'd like to use. But this is a basic for loop right here. You have the for, and in the condition part here, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on here. And what you're actually doing is you're creating and instantiating a variable. You're doing your condition, and also you're doing you're taking your variable and indexing it by 1. And then you have your actual statement. I know it looks a little confusing, but once you understand and grasp the concept of the for loop and kind of you can break these apart right here, it becomes a little easier to read and use. And so let's go ahead and open up our code environment here, and we'll put a for loop in action. Alright, once we got our new project created here, let's take a look at the actual for loop itself. Give ourselves some space there. Okay, so we're going to start out with the word for, opening parenthesis, int x equals 1, semicolon, x less than or equal to 100, semicolon, x plus plus, closing parenthesis, and then opening curly, closing curly. Alright, there's a lot going on here. First of all, we have the declaration and instantiation of our indexing variable, similar to what we've used in the 2 previous examples of the int index. We declare and instantiate that here in this line. We also have the condition statement, the one we're checking to see if it evaluates to true or false in the same line. And then we have our incrementing statement as well. That's similar to what we did in the previous examples of int index plus plus. So you have all 3 of those in one line, and it greatly reduces the amount of code you actually need. So this works just as the other similar loops do. It does loop around, and we'll take a look at how it actually functions here. But let's just go ahead and output our numbers to the screen. Console.writeLine, and we're just going to use x toString. Okay, and F5, and there is our output that we were looking for. Now, how this actually works is when it reaches a for loop, the first thing it does is it instantiates, it declares and instantiates this particular variable. This can be anything you want it to be. As far as name, it has to be an integer type value, or something that can be indexed. And then once that's done, then it does the condition statement. It checks if this evaluates to true or false. If it evaluates to true, it will come down to this line here. It'll execute that line of code there, hit the closing curly brace, and then it comes back up, and then it does the increment statement, and then it'll check the condition again. So it kind of does a few things here. The first time it runs, it does this line here, then it does the condition, then it does the actual statement, then it comes up, does the incrementer. Once it increments, then it checks the statement. So the second time it runs, it does this and this. First time it runs, it does first part, second part, code. I know it looks a bit confusing, but like I said, you can break this apart into other options as well. You don't have to have all this stuff in one line. For example, we can take out the actual variable itself. We can declare x up here, and we can just get rid of that down here. And the only thing we need to do is make sure there's a semicolon there. That's just letting the code know that, hey, I'm leaving that part out. And then we still have the condition statement here, and that will run just as desired. The other thing we can do is we can leave this part out. We can take the x++, the incrementer, out of there. We can put that somewhere else in the code. You have to put it after your statement here, or whatever you're doing towards the bottom, so it'll increment after it gets done doing whatever it's doing, and that'll run as desired. So those are the three different ways you can actually use a for loop. I don't like using it any other way than the first one that I showed you there, just because it's compact and uses less lines of code. Put this back to how we had it. Get rid of this. So by itself, in this case here, it's the most complex part is just understanding, what's all going on in this line right here, and once you get that down, understanding the for loop is pretty basic, and you can do some pretty powerful things with the actual for loop. And we may get into those. A need might come up later on in some lessons if we're creating some type of program that needs a for loop of some sort. So with this loop here, I would suggest play around with it, do some different things with it, and learn about it and see what you can come up with. Okay, the next loop that we were going to talk about is going to be the FOREACH loop. This particular loop here is a little different when it comes to how and what it's used for. I was going to talk about this loop in this lesson, but I want to wait until we learn about arrays, which is in the next lesson. The FOREACH loop is basically used to iterate or walk through collections of data. And once we learn the array, this particular loop here will be much easier for you to understand and grasp the concept of what's going on behind the scenes. Alright, next thing we're going to talk about when it comes to loops is break and continue. Break and continue are ways of either exiting out of a loop or skipping lines of code that you don't want to execute. I know that might sound odd at first, but sometimes the need does come up in certain programs or certain situations where you're doing a loop and you check something and you need to either skip the next line of code or skip out of the actual loop so something doesn't get executed, or completely bail out and get out of the loop altogether. Let's go back into our code here and we'll take a look at how break and continue are actually used. Okay, so quick demonstration here on break and continue to show you the difference between the two of them. They're really easy to understand. If you just think break out of the loop, continue with the loop. So before, what we can do to do that is we need some type of an if statement or some type of check to say, hey, do we want to continue on with the loop? Do we want to break out of the loop or not? So what we'll do is we'll just use x, for example. We'll do if x is equal to 76, then first one we'll do is continue. What will happen here is if x is equal to 76, continue will be hit, and what happens is the loop immediately returns back up here to the condition statement. So let's go ahead and press F5, see what we get on the screen, and as you can see, it goes 75, 77. 76 did not get output to the screen because at that point there we told it to skip the rest of the loop and go back and start over again. So that's continue there. I think I've probably used break more than continue throughout coding. It just, you never really know where you're going to need it until, you get into whatever it is you're programming, and, where a continue might work better, and sometimes,
brakes work better. Just all depends on what you're actually doing. So now let's demonstrate the actual break statement. Break does just that. It breaks out of the entire loop. So what we should actually get here is 1 to 75. As you can see, that's what we get there. And what that one does there is, if x is equal to 76, break, it completely bails out of the entire loop, comes down here, and then it just finishes executing the rest of the code in that particular method. So as you can see, continue and break here, not too difficult, pretty easy to understand the concept of what they do. If you can just remember, break, break out, and then continue with my condition. It's kind of an easy way to understand that and remember those two. Okay, so what's to come in Lesson 5? Yep, you guessed it. We're going to take a look at arrays. What they are, how we use them, and the arrays lesson here is probably going to be a little long because the arrays are powerful and they can be complex, and you can do an array with basically any data type that we want. But we're probably mainly going to focus on the string array, maybe do like integer array, and then maybe something else. We'll see what happens. And then we'll talk about that for each loop that we left out in the previous lesson there. So I appreciate you for watching and hope to see you in Lesson 5.